If you look a furious person right in the eye and you tell them to just calm down.
Oh, it's the absolute worst thing you could do.
Right. You are biologically guaranteeing that they will get angrier.
Yeah, it's this physiological certainty.
It's like you're essentially throwing gasoline onto a very specific neurochemical fire and then, standing there asking why it's burning brighter.
I mean, it's kind of the ultimate paradox of human behavior, isn't it?
Yeah.
We try to use language and logic to solve a problem that is entirely rooted in the primal architecture of our nervous system.
Yeah.
Like we treat emotional flooding as this sort of software glitch when it is actually a massive hardware override.
And that misunderstanding of our own hardware, right? That's exactly why so many of us feel like our days are just, a series of unavoidable train wrecks.
Absolutely.
I want you, the person listening right now, to picture a hypothetical person. Let's call them Alex.
Okay, I like this.
And I want you to picture Alex because I'm willing to bet you have lived Alex's day. Like, you might literally be living it right now.
We've all been Alex.
Exactly. So Alex wakes up already exhausted. The alarm goes off, and before their feet even touch the floor, they grab their smartphone.
Oh, the classic mistake.
Right. And immediately they see this highly stressful, totally ambiguous email from their boss, and it's like 6:45 in the morning.
Ouch.
Yeah. Alex hasn't even had a glass of water yet, and they are already rushing to get ready, rushing to the office, and just feeling this immense physical weight.
Yeah.
It's like they are trying to sprint a marathon, but they're dragging a heavy, open parachute behind them.
That friction is just palpable.
Yeah.
And, that friction isn't just psychological.
Right.
It is a measurable physiological drag coefficient on the body.
So they drag that parachute all the way to work. They sit down to tackle this massive critical report. But the focus simply isn't there.
Of course not.
They are trying to rate this complex thing while simultaneously answering emails, checking a constantly pinging messenger app, and, mentally rereading that morning's email.
The brain is just thrashing at that point.
Exactly. They are attempting to multitask their way out of this overwhelming deficit, and the result is basically staring blankly at a blinking cursor, achieving absolutely nothing.
And the frustration just builds and builds.
Okay, the parachute gets heavier, and then, bam, comes the breaking point. Mid-afternoon, a colleague walks by and makes this mildly critical, totally offhand comment about a project timeline.
Just a tiny spark.
Just a spark. It shouldn't be a big deal. On a normal day, it would bounce right off. But today, Alex snaps. The reaction is completely disproportionate, harsh, and it escalates instantly into a tense, ugly, very public argument.
Yeah, the cascading failure is pretty much complete at that stage.
And now the day is over. Alex is sitting alone in the driver's seat of their car in the parking lot. The engine is off, but their heart is absolutely pounding against their ribs.
Just dreading tomorrow.
Exactly. Dreading the conversation they're going to have to fix this massive, personal mess. They feel completely and utterly out of control. And it begs the question, why does it feel like our own biology, our attention span, and our own relationships are constantly conspiring against us?
Because we try so hard to force it, right?
We try to force productivity. We try to force our way to a quote-unquote win in an argument. But the harder we push against these things, the more exhausted and isolated we become.
Well, we have a massive stack of incredibly fascinating materials in front of us today, covering neurobiology, the mechanics of cognitive focus, and the psychology of conflict resolution.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. But our mission for this exploration is to synthesize these seemingly disparate fields. We want to show how Alex, and really how you, the listener, can flip this script entirely.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this. We are going to map out the journey from a state of total biological chaos to a state of focused, self-directed mastery, and finally, to the architecture of genuine human connection.
Sounds like a solid plan.
So as we go through this, I want you to map Alex's chaotic day onto your own life. Think about your own parachute.
That's a great way to frame it.
Let's start with that explosive moment in the hallway, when Alex snapped at the colleague. Because the immediate instinct from the outside is to judge the behavior.
Oh, absolutely. We immediately think, wow, Alex lacks discipline. Or, Alex is just a difficult, temperamental person.
Right. But looking at the biological data in our materials, applying a moral or personality-based lens to that moment is fundamentally incorrect.
Yeah, it completely misses the reality of what is actually happening under the skin. The research clearly indicates that Alex's explosion wasn't some personality flaw.
It wasn't a failure of willpower?
Not at all. It was a complete biological hijacking. To really understand this, we have to examine the mechanics of what the clinical literature calls the ignition phase.
The ignition phase. Okay, break down the mechanics of that for us. Like when Alex opened that email at 6:45 a.m., what literally happened inside their body?
Okay, so the moment the visual data of that stressful email hit Alex's retina and it was processed by the brain, the amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, sounded a massive alarm. And here is the major structural issue with the human brain. It does not distinguish between a physical threat, like, say, a predator stepping out of the bushes.
Right, like a tiger.
Exactly, a tiger. It doesn't distinguish between the tiger and a psychological threat, like an ambiguous email from management. The biological response is completely identical.
Wow.
So the amygdala sends this distress signal to the hypothalamus, which basically acts like a command center. The hypothalamus then activates the sympathetic nervous system.
And this is the fight or flight response, right? The body is gas pedal.
Yes, but let's actually look at what pressing that gas pedal entails physically. The adrenal glands immediately pump adrenaline and noradrenaline right into the bloodstream.
Pumping the fuel.
Exactly.
Yep.
Your heart rate violently accelerates to push blood to your major muscle groups, literally preparing you to run or physically fight. Your breathing becomes shallow, rapid, and shifts entirely to your upper chest to take in oxygen quickly.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Your pupils dilate. Your hands and feet might actually get warm as the vascular system shunts blood away from the digestive tract and pushes it towards the extremities.
So you are primed for combat. But what happens to the brain during this massive chemical dump? Because, Alex wasn't trying to fight a tiger, they were trying to write a report.
And this is the most critical piece of the whole puzzle. The brain is this incredibly energy-hungry organ. During the ignition phase, the body decides that physical survival is the only priority.
Right.
So it actually diverts metabolic resources away from non-essential systems.
Yeah.
And in a life-or-death survival scenario, complex, long-term, rational thought is considered non-essential.
Oh, man. So the logic just goes away.
Yeah, the prefrontal cortex, the logical, rational, forward-thinking, impulse-controlling part of your brain right behind your forehead, is essentially starved of resources. It literally goes offline.
It just shuts down.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
The executive function is entirely bypassed. So when the colleague made that mildly critical comment 7 hours later, Alex did not have access to their logic.
Because they've been running the gas pedal since 6:45.
Right. They were operating from a pure, unadulterated survival instinct governed by the limbic system. You just cannot expect a rational, measured, socially calibrated response from a brain that is actively flooding the body with neurochemicals designed for mortal combat. The logic center was just closed for business.
That makes so much sense. Now, a healthy nervous system is supposed to have a counterbalance to this, correct? It's not just a gas pedal. There is the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest network, which acts as the brake.
Exactly. The vagus nerve is the primary superhighway of that parasympathetic brake.
Yeah.
In a resilient system, the threat passes. The vagus nerve releases acetylcholine onto the heart's pacemaker cells. The heart rate slows down, and then the prefrontal cortex boots back up.
So we go back to normal.
We should. But the problem for Alex, and honestly for so many of us, is that our modern environment is just this constant stream of low-grade threats. The gas pedal is permanently mashed to the floor, and the brake line is degraded.
So we get stuck in a state of chronic sympathetic dominance.
Precisely.
Now, there is a metric discussed extensively in our materials for tracking this precise balance, or lack thereof, between the sympathetic gas and the parasympathetic brake. Heart rate variability, or HRV.
Yes.
I think we need to clarify this because the assumption is often that a perfectly steady heartbeat, ticking away like a flawless metronome, is the sign of a healthy, robust cardiovascular system.
It is a profound misconception. I mean, if your heart is beating like a metronome with the exact same millisecond interval between every single beat, you are likely in a state of severe chronic stress or physical depletion.
Wait, really?
Yes. A healthy, resilient nervous system is highly, highly responsive. It is constantly adjusting to the environment.
So variability is actually the goal.
Exactly. Think about it like this. When you inhale, you are mildly activating the sympathetic nervous system, so your heart rate should speed up just a tiny fraction of a second. And when you exhale, you are engaging the vagus nerve and that parasympathetic brake, so your heart rate should slow down a tiny fraction of a second. That microfluctuation between beats is your heart rate variability.
Oh, I see.
So high HRV means your autonomic nervous system is incredibly flexible. It can instantly hit the gas to respond to a demand and then instantly hit the brake to recover.
It's a measure of adaptability, but for Alex, who has been marinating in stress hormones since 6:45 a.m., that adaptability is just gone.
The system is flooded. The heart beats at a rigid, fixed, elevated rate because the body genuinely believes it is under constant siege. The HRV plummets.
Wow.
And the research highlights that if you are utilizing a wearable device and you see your HRV steadily dropping over a period of several days, combined with an elevated resting heart rate, you shouldn't just view that as a quirky data point.
Right. It's not just a bad night's sleep.
No, your biology is sending you a blaring neon SOS signal. Your systemic reserves are failing.
You know, there's an analogy that I think perfectly captures the tragedy of this physiological state.
Well, let's hear it.
Living in chronic sympathetic dominance is like sitting in your car, stuck in completely gridlocked bumper-to-bumper traffic, but you have the transmission shifted into fourth gear, and you are absolutely flooring the accelerator.
That is a terrifying image.
Right. The engine is roaring, you are burning through your fuel reserves at a catastrophic rate, the temperature gauge is spiking, the friction is destroying the internal mechanics, but you aren't actually moving forward an inch. You are just destroying the engine while sitting entirely still.
That is the literal biological definition of burnout. Maximum metabolic expenditure for zero forward momentum.
But let me push back on this a bit, because understanding the mechanism is one thing, but application is another.
Fair point.
Let's put ourselves in Alex's shoes in that precise moment in the hallway. The heart is racing, the prefrontal cortex is dark, the amygdala is screaming. You can't just politely tell your biology to stand down.
No, you definitely cannot.
If someone tells you to quote-unquote calm down when you are in that state, it feels incredibly invalidating. Isn't trying to suppress or logic your way out of that biological cascade just going to create more internal pressure?
It absolutely will create more pressure, because telling an activated limbic system to simply stop being activated is like yelling at a hurricane to stop spinning. The storm does not care about your logic.
Right.
The critical insight from the psychological and biological research we are analyzing today is that you do not suppress the nervous system. You cannot think your way out of a physiological trap. You have to manually, physically pull the levers that force the hardware to reset.
So you have to change the body to change the mind.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that we have direct, conscious access to these manual overrides.
So before Alex can even begin to formulate an apology to the colleague or attempt to salvage that massive report, they have to reestablish a stable biological baseline. We have to manually engage that vagal brake.
Yes. The materials provide highly specific tactical protocols to shift the architecture from fight or flight back to rest and digest.
Okay, let's extract those protocols, because the first major tool highlighted is designed for immediate mid-crisis intervention. It's not something you do on a meditation cushion. It's something you do in the hallway or at your desk the very moment you feel the ignition phase sparking.
Right.
It is an internal quick scan broken down into 4 precise steps. Let's look at the mechanism of step 1, conversational breathing. Why is it called that, and what is it actually doing?
Well, conversational breathing is a specific application of diaphragmatic breathing, but the name is the key to the pacing. When people are told to take a deep breath during a panic response, what do they usually do?
They gasp like huge gulps of air into their chest.
Exactly. Massive, forceful, rapid gulps into their upper chest. But that rapid expansion actually signals the brain that you are preparing for intense physical exertion. It feeds the sympathetic loop.
Oh, so it makes it worse.
Yeah. Conversational breathing requires you to inhale and exhale at a rhythm, volume, and depth that would allow you to comfortably, continuously speak to someone sitting across from you.
So it's low and slow.
Very low and slow. It relies on the diaphragm, which is that umbrella-shaped muscle at the base of your ribs. As you breathe low into your belly, the diaphragm pulls down. This creates negative pressure to draw air into the lower lobes of the lungs.
Okay.
But more importantly, the physical movement of the diaphragm stimulates the vagus nerve running right through it. You are mechanically massaging the brake pedal with your own internal musculature.
Okay, so step 1, mechanically stimulate the vagus nerve. Step 2 is closing your eyes, which, sounds overly simplistic, but the neurological reason behind it is fascinating.
It is. The visual cortex, which is located in the occipital lobe at the back of the brain, requires a truly staggering amount of computational bandwidth just to process the constant stream of light, movement, spatial relationships, and facial expressions in our environment.
Right.
When you are stressed, your visual field naturally narrows to lock onto threats. By simply closing your eyes, even for just 2 or 3 seconds, you are abruptly shutting off a massive fire hose of external sensory data.
So you instantly free up cognitive processing power.
Exactly. You are signaling to the threat detection center, hey, I am safe enough in this environment to willingly blind myself for a moment.
Yeah.
It significantly lowers the systemic guard.
It's a literal bandwidth reclamation. I love that.
Yeah.
So step 3 is scanning the body for tension, which brings proprioception into play.
Right. While you are maintaining that low conversational exhale, you run a rapid mental sweep from the crown of your head all the way down to your toes.
Yeah.
You are looking for the physical hiding places of the stress response.
Like where you hold the tension.
Exactly. Are your shoulders hiking up toward your ears to protect your neck? Are the muscles in your jaw completely clenched? Is your stomach in knots? Once you locate the epicenter of the physical tension, you consciously direct your exhales toward relaxing that specific muscle group.
You are demonstrating top-down control over the physical stress response.
You are.
And then we reach step 4, which is arguably the most psychologically complex part of the scan. You have to identify the emotion you are experiencing, but the methodology demands a very rigid syntactical structure.
This is crucial.
Yeah. You are not allowed to say, I am furious or I am overwhelmed. You must use the phrase, I notice I am feeling. Why does that specific phrasing matter so much?
Because language constructs our internal reality. When you say, I am angry, you are linguistically and psychologically fusing your entire identity with the temporary emotional state. You become the anger.
There is no separation between the observer and the experience.
Precisely. But when you deploy the phrase, I notice I am feeling angry, or I notice I am feeling a surge of defensiveness, you instantly create psychological distance. You step out of the storm and become the sky watching the storm pass through.
The psychological texts call this effect labeling, right? Like, name it to tame it.
Yes. And the functional MRI data on this is just astounding. When a person is experiencing intense negative emotion, the amygdala is glowing bright with activity on the scan.
Right.
But the moment the subject assigns a precise granular word to that emotion, the very moment they categorize it, the blood flow and electrical activity physically migrate away from the emotional amygdala and shift over to the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex.
Wow.
The simple conscious act of labeling the feeling forces the logic center of the brain to boot back up to perform the categorization.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Think about the magnitude of that. We spend decades trying to argue ourselves out of bad moods, right? Trying to debate our anxieties, trying to logic our way out of a physiological cascade.
Okay.
We sit there analyzing why we are bad, which, shocker, just makes us madder, but the literature is screaming at us. Stop trying to solve physiological flooding with philosophical arguments.
You solve hardware problems with hardware interventions. You breathe, you block the visual fire hose, you release the muscle, you label the affect, and you force the blood back into the executive brain.
It is empowering because it is so mechanical. But, the quick scan is really a tourniquet. It stops the bleeding in the moment. The materials go much deeper, emphasizing that if you want to avoid needing a tourniquet every day, you have to fundamentally alter your biological baseline through micro habits.
Absolutely. Because if Alex's baseline is a chaotic, sleep-deprived, highly sensitized nervous system, the threshold for ignition is dangerously low. Like a dropped pen could trigger a meltdown.
And if we look at Alex's morning, the baseline was destroyed before they even got out of bed. Waking up and immediately flooding the visual cortex with a stressful email.
The worst way to start.
Let's unpack the morning routine, specifically the role of circadian biology, because the interventions suggested here aren't about, drinking green juice. They are about manipulating the master clock in the brain.
The circadian rhythm is the foundational rhythm upon which all other biological processes rest. The research is unequivocal here. To build a resilient, high-threshold nervous system, you must anchor this rhythm.
Okay.
The first step is waking up at the exact same time every single day, regardless of how you slept the night before, and regardless of whether it is a Tuesday or a Saturday.
That's tough for a lot of people.
It is, but the anchor itself is light. You require 10 to 15 minutes of natural sunlight in your eyes as close to waking as possible.
I want to clarify the mechanism here because a lot of people think, well, I turn on the bright fluorescent light in my bathroom while I shower. Isn't that basically the same thing?
It is not remotely the same thing. The lux intensity of indoor artificial lighting is drastically lower than natural sunlight, even on a completely overcast, cloudy day.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Furthermore, we have specific cells in our eyes called melanopsin containing retinal ganglion cells. They are particularly sensitive to the specific spectrum and intensity of light created by the sun at a low solar angle in the morning. When that specific sunlight hits those cells, an electrical signal is fired directly into the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the master clock located in the hypothalamus.
And what does that signal actually do, like practically?
Two crucial things. First, it completely halts the production of residual melatonin, which is the hormone that makes you feel sleepy and groggy. It clears the brain fog.
Nice.
Second, it triggers a healthy, natural pulse of cortisol. Now, we usually think of cortisol as a bad stress hormone, but a morning pulse is essential. It provides alertness, focus, and immune system regulation.
It wakes you up.
Exactly. And finally, that morning light exposure sets a biological timer, guaranteeing that roughly 14 to 16 hours later, your pineal gland will begin secreting melatonin again, ensuring you could actually fall asleep that night.
Wow.
It is the single most powerful biological lever you can pull to optimize your daily energy and nighttime recovery.
But let's look at the edge cases here. Let's say Alex is well past the point of a morning routine. They missed the sunlight, they didn't do the quick scan in time, and now they're in the aftermath of the hallway argument.
Right.
The argument is over, but the cortisol and adrenaline are still aggressively circulating in their bloodstream. They are pacing their office, vibrating with residual anger. A low conversational breath isn't going to cut through that chemical flood, is it?
No, it won't.
Yeah.
This is where we look at the half-life of stress hormones, and we can draw this brilliant parallel to early childhood social and emotional learning models.
Okay, tell me about that.
In robust child psychology frameworks, educators understand that when a child has massive, overwhelming emotional flooding, you don't ask them to just sit still and reflect.
Right. That never works.
Exactly. The child's body is prepped for physical action. If you demand stillness, the chemicals remain trapped, creating intense agitation. The children are actually taught that they need a safe, intense physical release.
Like what?
They're instructed to do jumping jacks, or to violently, aggressively crumple up pieces of scrap paper and throw them against a wall.
Throwing crumpled paper, which, sounds incredibly juvenile, but the physiology behind it is totally sound.
It is entirely sound. Stress hormones like adrenaline are literally designed to be metabolized by physical exertion. They are fuel for the muscles to run or fight.
Right.
If you sit in an ergonomic office chair and try to just logic it away and let it go, that fuel just sits in your vascular system, keeping your heart rate elevated and your threat detection systems hypersensitive. You have to burn the fuel.
So adults need this just as much.
Absolutely. Adults need this metabolic clearance just as much as a toddler does.
Mm-hmm.
If you are vibrating with rage after a meeting, going into a stairwell and doing 20 rapid jumping jacks, or intensely squeezing a grip strengthener, is a highly biologically sound strategy. You are manually metabolizing the stress chemicals out of your blood.
That is so practical. Now, the materials also present a fascinating contrast regarding how we can use temperature as a blunt force instrument to manipulate the nervous system.
Oh, yes.
They contrast the mechanism of a cold shower with the mechanism of a warm evening foot bath. It's like using thermal engineering on the human body.
It really is. The deliberate cold exposure protocol is remarkable for building autonomic resilience. And the protocol doesn't require like a 10-minute ice bath.
Thank goodness.
Right. It involves just 30 to 60 seconds of uncomfortably cool water at the very end of your normal shower. The moment that cold water hits your skin, your body registers a massive thermal shock. The locus coeruleus in the brainstem pumps out norepinephrine. Your instinct is to gasp, to hyperventilate, and to tense every single muscle.
You're intentionally inducing the ignition phase.
Exactly. You are manufacturing a controlled stressor. But the training occurs because you do not allow your breathing to become chaotic. Mm-hmm. You force yourself to maintain a steady, controlled 4-second inhale and a 6-second exhale while enduring the shock.
So you're retraining the response.
Yes. You are teaching your nervous system, even when the environment is harsh and shocking, I can maintain top-down control of my physiology. It acts as a hard reset for the nervous system, and the lingering release of dopamine and norepinephrine provides hours of elevated mood and focus.
And then, on the other end of the circadian cycle, we have the foot bath, which honestly sounds like a spa treatment, but is actually a targeted vascular intervention.
It's pure biology. A warm foot bath for 10 to 15 minutes before bed serves a very specific thermoregulatory purpose. In order to transition into deep sleep, your core body temperature needs to drop by about 1 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
When you submerge your feet in warm water, it causes massive vasodilation, which is the widening of the blood vessels in your extremities. This draws warm blood away from your central core in your head, pulling it down to the surface of your feet where the heat can easily dissipate into the environment.
Oh, wow.
You are physically accelerating the core temperature drop required to initiate the sleep architecture.
That is amazing. Okay, so let's thread this back to Alex. Alex is sitting in the car. They've recognized the biological hijacking. They execute the quick scan. They use affect labeling to observe the emotion rather than becoming it. They understand the need to burn off the residual adrenaline. Maybe they do some jumping jacks. Their heart rate is dropping, vagal tone is restored, and the prefrontal cortex is booting back up. The physiological fire is officially extinguished.
The baseline is set.
But here's the structural issue. Just because the engine is no longer on fire doesn't mean it is driving in the right direction. When Alex actually walks back into the building, they are immediately confronted by a massive mountain of complex tasks.
The work doesn't go away.
Right. And an activated but undirected prefrontal cortex is highly susceptible to exhaustion. How do we build the architecture to harness that stabilized biology so they don't just burn out again by noon?
This transition from biological stabilization to cognitive direction is where the concept of the architecture of focus comes in, because having a calm baseline is totally useless if you wildly mismanage your attention.
Exactly.
And the biggest obstacle, Alex, and frankly the modern knowledge worker faces, is a fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding of how the human brain processes information.
We have to talk about the cognitive penalty of task switching, because Alex's morning was defined by trying to write a report, answer emails, and monitor a chat channel simultaneously, the enduring myth of multitasking.
It is perhaps the most destructive myth in the modern workplace. The human cerebral cortex does not multitask, period.
Right.
It cannot process two distinct streams of high-level cognitive information simultaneously. What we call multitasking is actually rapid sequential task switching. And every single time you yank your attention from the complex report, pivot to read an unrelated email, and then pivot back to the report, you incur a severe cognitive penalty.
Expand on that penalty for us. Like if we use the analogy of a computer's RAM, the random access memory, what is the brain actually doing during that pivot?
Working memory is very much like RAM. When you are writing a deep analytical report, your brain has painstakingly loaded all the relevant context, the specific vocabulary, the overarching arguments, and the structural logic into your active working memory networks.
It takes time to build that up.
It takes a lot of time and metabolic energy to assemble that mental scaffolding. So when a notification pings and you switch over to read an email about a totally different project, your brain cannot hold both.
It has to drop one.
Yes. It must rapidly dismantle and dump the report scaffolding and then spend energy loading the email context.
And when you go back to the report 30 seconds later,
you have to dump the email context and painfully, piece by piece, reconstruct the complex scaffolding of the report all over again.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. This rapid construction and demolition burns massive amounts of glucose. It depletes the available neurotransmitters in the prefrontal cortex. It leaves you feeling deeply fatigued. It creates what we experience as brain fog, and it drastically increases the error rate of your work.
So you feel like you're working hard, but
you feel like you've been working incredibly hard for hours, but you've actually spent 80% of your energy just shifting gears.
So true focus isn't about staring relentlessly at a screen for 8 uninterrupted hours, fighting through the brain fog. That's just a recipe for diminishing returns.
It's biologically impossible. The materials we are discussing delve into the neuroscience of ultradian rhythms. Just as we have a circadian rhythm governing our 24-hour cycle, we have shorter 90 to 120-minute ultradian rhythms governing our energy and focus throughout the waking day.
Okay, how do those work?
The neural networks responsible for rigorous, directed concentration rely on a steady supply of acetylcholine and dopamine. After about 80 to 90 minutes of intense focus, those neurotransmitter pools run dry.
They just deplete.
The neurons themselves accumulate metabolic byproducts that interfere with signal transmission. The system literally needs a washout period.
And to manage this, the sources suggest a very rigid protocol. The 50-10 focus sprint. Which, sounds simple, but the mechanics of the 10 are where people always fail.
The protocol is highly effective. You work for 50 minutes on one singular, narrowly defined task. No extra browser tabs open. The phone is physically in another room. All notifications are severed. You are insulated.
Okay.
And then, at the 50-minute mark, you must take a 10-minute break. But the critical failure point is that people do not understand what constitutes a break for the brain.
Right. Alex finishes a 50-minute sprint. leans back in the chair, and opens a social media app to scroll for 10 minutes thinking they are relaxing.
Which provides absolute zero cognitive recovery. Scrolling a visual feed still requires your visual cortex to process rapidly changing stimuli. It requires your language centers to read text. It triggers microdoses of dopamine and cortisol as you react emotionally to the content.
So the brain is still working just as hard.
The task-positive network of your brain remains fully engaged. True rest requires a complete context switch to activate the default mode network, which is the network associated with daydreaming, memory consolidation, and passive thought.
What does a default mode break actually look like in a standard office setting?
It means standing up and looking out a window into the far distance. Staring at a screen locks the ciliary muscles in your eyes into a state of contraction. Looking at a distant horizon physically relaxes those muscles, which actually sends a calming signal to the brainstem.
Oh, that's wild.
It means engaging in optic flow, the visual sensation of objects moving past you as you walk down a hallway or outside. It means doing 3 minutes of that conversational breathing we talked about. You have to let the neural engine idle. You have to let the acetylcholine pools refill.
There is a practical framework in the documents for setting up the environment to ensure those 50 minutes actually work. They outline the 5S principles of focus. Let's look at the psychology behind these because they're great.
The first S is simple. You must ruthlessly remove all visual and digital clutter from your environment. A cluttered visual field forces your brain to constantly expend energy, filtering out irrelevant stimuli. A clear desk creates a clear mental workspace.
Okay, simple. What's the second?
The second S is small. This is about bypassing the amygdala's overwhelm response. You do not sit down with the goal to write the annual review. That is a massive, ambiguous threat that invites procrastination.
It's too scary for the brain.
Right. You sit down to write the introductory paragraph outlining Q1 revenue. You make the target so small that the brain registers zero resistance to starting.
The third S ties directly back to our RAM analogy, right? Single.
Single tasking. One objective and only one objective during the sprint. If a random thought or an urgent reminder pops into your head during the 50 minutes, you don't act on it. You write it down on a physical piece of paper to offload it from your working memory, and you immediately return to the single task.
Yeah, the fourth S.
Short. This leverages Parkinson's law, which basically states that work will naturally expand to fill the time allotted for its completion. By time-boxing the effort to exactly 50 minutes, you create an artificial sense of urgency that forces efficiency and prevents the brain from wandering.
And the final S is smile, which on the surface sounds like, toxic positivity or just corporate cheerleading. But if we look at the neurochemistry, there is a very pragmatic reason for it.
It is entirely pragmatic. Dopamine is widely misunderstood purely as the reward chemical. It is actually the molecule of motivation and forward propulsion.
Interesting.
When you find a way to enjoy the challenge, or when you consciously approach a task with a mindset of curiosity rather than dread, your brain releases a baseline level of dopamine. That dopamine physically lowers the threshold for action. It makes the effort feel less painful. It keeps you engaged in the friction.
Synthesizing these principles, the single focus, the small tasks, the uninterrupted sprints, it strongly mirrors the architecture of early childhood education models.
It really does.
The texts implicitly reference methodologies where an environment is meticulously prepared for a child, and the child is allowed to choose a path, whether it's building a complex block structure or tracing letters. The golden rule in those environments is that you never interrupt a child who is deeply engaged in self-directed work.
Never.
They are allowed to stay with the friction until they achieve an internal sense of mastery.
It is a profound observation. As children, we possess this innate biological capacity for deep focus. We naturally enter states of flow when we are building, playing, or exploring.
And then we just lose it.
The tragedy of modern adulthood is that we systematically surrender this autonomy. We allow push notifications, the arbitrary demands of an inbox, and the constant interruptions of open-plan offices to dictate our attention minute by minute. We train our brains to become purely reactive, waiting for the next stimulus, rather than proactively directing our cognitive resources.
There is a metaphor in the analysis that brilliantly illustrates the physics of attention. The magnifying glass.
Oh, I love this one.
If you take a magnifying glass on a bright sunny day and you hold it over a pile of dry leaves, but you constantly wave it around, moving from leaf to leaf, nothing happens. The leaves might get slightly warm.
Right.
That is multitasking. But if you hold the lens perfectly still, focusing the scattered rays of sunlight into a single, intensely concentrated point of energy, and you sustain that point over time, it generates fire. The equation is clear. Focus equals depth of attention multiplied by sustained time.
Depth multiplied by time. If you sacrifice depth by constantly shifting your gaze, or you sacrifice time by constantly interrupting the sprint, the math fails. You get no fire.
The sources introduce a psychological framework to explain how we achieve that depth called the inner game. This completely changed how I view my own internal monologue.
It's a game changer.
The premise is that inside our heads, during any performance or task, there is a constant dialogue between two distinct entities. There is self-one, which operates as the inner critic. It is the conscious, verbal, anxious voice that judges every keystroke, worries about the final outcome, and constantly issues commands.
We all know that voice.
Yeah. And then there is self-two, which is the subconscious procedural memory system, the actual engine that possesses the skills and knows how to execute the task instinctively.
The inner game theory fundamentally changed performance psychology. The classic illustration is a tennis player serving the ball.
Walk us through that.
Okay, if the player is standing on the baseline and self-one is screaming, "Make sure you snap your wrist. Don't double fault like last time. The boss is watching. Bend your knees." The central nervous system becomes overwhelmed with conscious directives.
Too much input.
The muscles tense up. The movement becomes jerky and mechanical. Self-one is actively interfering with the fluid capability of self-two.
So the million-dollar question is, how do you gag self-one? How do you quiet the critic so the doer can actually work?
You cannot argue with self-one to make it quiet. That just creates more internal noise. You have to give the conscious mind a highly specific, neutral focal point in the present moment.
So what does the coach do in the tennis example?
The coach stops telling the player how to swing. Instead, the coach says, "I want you to focus all of your visual attention exclusively on the fuzzy seams of the incoming tennis ball. Just watch the seams spin."
Oh, interesting.
When the conscious mind's bandwidth is fully consumed by tracking the precise, neutral details of the present reality, self-one has no processing power left to complain or worry. The anxiety evaporates, and self-two is suddenly liberated to perform the swing beautifully, instinctively, and without hesitation.
Which is the exact neurological definition of a flow state, the complete dissolution of the inner critic replaced by total immersion in the present action.
Precisely. Flow occurs when the challenge of the task perfectly aligns with your skill level, and your attention is anchored to the immediate feedback of the work.
But I have to challenge this concept in the context of Alex's day. It is very easy to conceptualize flow if you are a professional athlete tracking a ball, or a musician lost in a melody, or a programmer building an app from scratch. But Alex is grinding through a mandatory, potentially tedious corporate report. How do you find a flow state? How do you balance challenge and skill when you didn't even choose the task, and the task itself is inherently uninspiring?
That is the reality for the vast majority of the global workforce. We rarely have total autonomy over what we are required to do. But if we connect this to the overarching theme of internal control, you always retain autonomy over how you engage the task. You have to manufacture the challenge.
Walk me through how to manufacture a challenge out of a spreadsheet.
You turn the mundane requirement into an internal gamified challenge against your own baseline. You create personal micro goals within the larger corporate framework.
Give me an example.
If the external mandate is to process 50 complex compliance forms, the baseline goal is merely completion. To trigger flow, you invent a parameter. You say, "Can I process the next 5 forms using exclusively keyboard shortcuts without allowing my hand to touch the mouse?" Or, "My average time for a batch is 20 minutes. Can I maintain absolute accuracy and finish this batch in 18 minutes?
You are artificially increasing the difficulty to demand a higher level of presence.
Exactly. You're tricking your prefrontal cortex into deep engagement. When you successfully navigate the spreadsheet using only shortcuts or beat your time by 2 minutes, your brain registers a victory. It releases a microdose of dopamine.
So you feel good about it.
You feel a sudden sense of competence and agency. You have successfully engineered a flow state out of a profoundly boring task simply by manipulating the parameters of your own engagement.
Okay, let's recalibrate and look at where Alex stands now. The biological storm of the morning has been neutralized through the quick scan and physical release. They have built the architecture of focus, deployed the 50-10 sprints, quieted self-one by gamifying the work, and they have actually managed to conquer the massive report.
They're having a great afternoon now.
The cognitive parachute is gone, but the day is not over. The ultimate test remains. They still have to walk down the hall, knock on the door, and face the colleague they exploded at earlier.
We have stabilized the internal environment. Now we face the collision of worlds. interpersonal conflict. And because cognitive focus burns energy, Alex's prefrontal cortex is likely depleted again, making this the most dangerous moment of the day.
Let's set the scene in that office. Alex sits down across from the colleague. The overwhelming, almost unavoidable human instinct in this exact moment is defensive justification. It is to immediately explain why you snapped. I had a terrible morning. The boss sent an insane email. I was stressed. The instinct is to launch a PR campaign for your ego, to prove that your reaction was justified, and ultimately to try and win the interaction.
Which is the most efficient way to guarantee that the professional relationship is permanently severed.
Right.
If we distill the conflict resolution psychology in our materials down to its most fundamental axiom, it is this: an argument is never a battle to be won. If your neurological posture entering the room is that of a combatant seeking victory, you have already lost the war.
If an argument isn't a fight to prove who is right, what is it? How should we conceptualize it?
An argument, particularly a highly emotionally charged one, is actually a diagnostic window into the other person's internal suffering. The texts utilize a powerful metaphor to illustrate this: the iceberg concept.
The idea that the aggressive behavior you see is only the tiny fraction of ice visible above the waterline.
Precisely. The human being you are interacting with is never just the two-dimensional avatar of anger you see on the surface. When Alex's colleague made that snide, critical comment in the hallway, Alex only reacted to the tip of the iceberg: the tone, the disrespect, the interruption.
Right.
But what massive structure is submerged under the dark water? Perhaps that colleague is terrified of an upcoming round of layoffs. Perhaps they're navigating a brutal divorce, or they have a child at home with a chronic illness and they haven't slept more than 3 hours a night for a week.
You just don't know.
You don't. The aggression presented on the surface is almost universally driven by deep-seated fear, physical exhaustion, pain, or desperately unmet needs hidden beneath the waterline.
So when Alex snapped back and went on the attack, they were essentially taking a hammer and angrily chipping away at the very top of an iceberg, wondering why the mountain of ice wasn't moving.
Right. You cannot alter the trajectory of an iceberg by attacking the visible tip. You have to possess the emotional intelligence to look beneath the water and understand the massive, hidden currents driving the structure.
But getting to that level of understanding is incredibly difficult because we sabotage the process. The materials identify 3 specific toxic behaviors that destroy our ability to see beneath the surface. They classify them as the 3 knives that cut connection.
Let's examine the first knife: misunderstanding.
Okay, what does that mean in this context?
Misunderstanding here doesn't just mean mishearing a word. It occurs when 2 people are engaged in a furious argument, but they are fundamentally operating in 2 completely different realities. They're acting like they were in 2 different movies.
Oh.
They aren't even arguing about the same subject. Alex believes the argument is strictly about the timeline of the project. The colleague actually believes the argument is about Alex consistently disrespecting their seniority and expertise over the past year.
So they're just completely missing each other.
Unless you stop and explicitly clarify the actual root subject of the disagreement, you will aggressively talk past each other until you are both exhausted.
The second knife is defensive reactions, which ties right back to the biology we discussed earlier.
It's the ego's immediate deployment of blast shields. As soon as the colleague offers a criticism, Alex's amygdala registers a threat to their social standing. The walls go up instantly.
Naturally.
The tragedy of the defensive reaction is that you completely stop listening to comprehend. You are only listening to scan their sentences for weaknesses so you can formulate your counterattack. You are no longer participating in a collaborative conversation. You are engaged in a verbal siege.
And the third knife is one that often catches people off guard because it sounds like a strategy for peace, lack of self-assertion, or the use of weak language.
It seems highly counterintuitive. Many people believe that being hyper-accommodating, passive, and overly apologetic is the best way to diffuse or avoid conflict.
Like, just roll over and be nice.
Right. But routinely using weak language, apologizing profusely when you haven't actually made an error, or failing to clearly state your own needs creates a toxic breeding ground for resentment. It confuses the other person about where you actually stand.
So they don't know what you want.
If you do not confidently define your boundaries, people will inadvertently step all over them. You will silently absorb that disrespect until the internal pressure reaches a critical mass, leading to a massive, disproportionate explosion weeks or months down the line. Passivity is just delayed aggression.
There is an analogy in the texts for handling that very first dangerous moment of conflict that completely shifted my perspective, the analogy of dropping the rope.
It's a brilliant visualization for disrupting the conflict loop.
Walk us through it.
Imagine that the angry colleague is holding a thick, abrasive, heavy rope. Wrapped up in the fibers of that rope is all their submerged anxiety, their unfair judgments, and their displaced anger. They rear back and throw the other end of the rope directly at your chest.
And the deeply ingrained biological instinct is to reach out, catch the rope, plant your feet, and pull back with all your might to start a tug of war.
Yes. But the moment you catch the rope and pull, the tension is created. You are locked into the dynamic. You are in the fight.
Exactly. The conflict only exists because of the tension between the two of you.
Right. But here is the ultimate realization of autonomy. You have choice. When they throw that harsh, unfair comment at you, you can simply watch the rope hit your chest and drop to the floor. You could look at the rope lying on the ground and consciously choose to leave it there. You are not obligated to pick it up.
It's like trying to extinguish a grease fire with a flamethrower. When we try to win the argument by aggressively proving the other person wrong, all we're actually doing is giving them the precise dopamine hit of combat that their activated nervous system is craving. We are literally feeding their ignition phase. We are participating in their dysregulation.
That is a phenomenal way to articulate it. You are serving as the fuel for their fire. So the tactical question becomes, how do you physically stop yourself from picking up the rope when every nerve in your body is screaming at you to fight back?
Yeah, how do you do that?
The clinical research points to a highly specific, agonizingly difficult maneuver.
Oh.
The 5 to 7 second pause.
5 to 7 seconds. I mean, think about the last time you were in a heated, confrontational meeting. Could you have held your tongue for 5 full seconds after an insult? In the middle of an adrenaline spike, 5 seconds feels like an absolute eternity.
It feels like an eternity because your fast pathway threat response wants to fill the void immediately to protect you. But let's look at the neuroscience of that silence.
What's happening in the brain?
The fast pathway from the thalamus to the amygdala processes the insult in milliseconds and preps the retaliatory strike. The slow pathway, which routes the information up through the prefrontal cortex for logical analysis, takes a few seconds longer to arrive at a conclusion.
So you're just waiting for the logic to catch up.
By forcing yourself to wait 5 to 7 seconds, you are physically buying time for the slow pathway to catch up and veto the amygdala's impulse to scream.
So the colleague says something incredibly rude. Instead of snapping back, Alex just looks at them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What happens to the dynamic in the room during that silence?
The energy of their attack hits a brick wall of absolute calm. In that extending silence, the colleague's harsh comment just hangs and echoes in the air. Without the immediate pushback they were anticipating, the feedback loop is broken. They are forced to sit in the discomfort of their own words.
That's powerful.
Physiologically, that pause acts as a circuit breaker for the ignition phase in both individuals. It allows Alex to remain grounded, and it often prompts the aggressor to spontaneously de-escalate or awkwardly walk back their initial hostility.
Okay, the circuit is broken, the screaming match is avoided, but a pause isn't a resolution. Alex cannot just stare at the colleague in total silence for the rest of the afternoon.
No, that'd be weird.
Right. Avoidance isn't connection. How does Alex actually re-engage, address the conflict, stand their ground, and repair the relationship without triggering a second explosion?
This is where we cross the bridge from de-escalation into the framework of connection and boundaries. You have neutralized the immediate threat. Now you have to deliberately construct the architecture of a healthy, productive conversation. And the foundational step of that architecture is setting the frame.
Setting the frame, meaning you establish the rigid parameters and the goal of the engagement before you even begin to discuss the details of the conflict.
Exactly. Before Alex allows the conversation to drift into the weaves, they must frame it. They need to explicitly define the topic and the desired outcome.
How does that sound?
For example, Alex might open the dialogue by saying, "My goal for this conversation is to figure out how we can streamline our communication on this project so we aren't frustrating each other. I want to focus exclusively on what happened this morning in the hallway and how we can prevent it from happening tomorrow."
Why is that constraint so critical to success?
Because if you do not establish a rigid frame, an emotional conversation possesses a natural gravitational pull toward historical grievance mining.
Oh, totally. Digging up the past.
Without a frame, An argument about a specific miscommunication this morning rapidly spirals into an argument about a missed email from 3 months ago, which then mutates into an attack on someone's fundamental character traits. By getting verbal agreement on the frame up front, like, are we agreeing to only discuss the project timeline today? You create a container that keeps the conversation focused and safe.
And within that safe container, Alex must utilize confident, grounded vocabulary. The texts strongly emphasize the necessity of stripping away filler words, qualifiers, and preemptive apologies.
This circles back to the danger of the third knife, the lack of self-assertion. Societal conditioning, particularly for women, often mandates the softening of language to appear agreeable and non-threatening.
Right.
But entering a negotiation or a conflict resolution by saying, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I was just thinking that maybe I might have a slightly different idea, if that's okay with you, completely eviscerates your credibility. It signals subservience and practically invites the other party to dismiss your perspective out of hand.
So what is the linguistic alternative? How does Alex assert themselves without sounding aggressive?
You replace the defensive weak language with grounded, neutral confidence. You strip the apology. Instead, you say, I have a different perspective on this timeline, or my experience of that interaction was different.
You're just stating facts.
You are stating your position as an objective reality of your experience, rather than meekly requesting permission to occupy space in the conversation.
And here's where we see the absolute brilliance of these models converging. We can bring back that exact technique from the biological reset and apply it externally, the I notice technique. It isn't just an internal tool for affect labeling. It is a phenomenal conversational weapon.
It is arguably the most disarming conversational tool available. Let's say, despite the frame of the colleague starts getting agitated and tries to drag up an old argument from last year, Alex's instinct is to say, you are changing the subject, or you always bring up the past when you're losing an argument.
But using phrases starting with you are or you always instantly registers as a character assassination. It guarantees a defensive reaction.
Right. You always puts the other person's entire identity on trial. The ego must defend itself. Instead, Alex deploys the tool. They say, I notice we're getting off track from what happened this morning. Or, if the tension is rising, I notice the volume of this conversation is getting louder.
It's completely neutralizing. You are making an objective, empirical observation about the shared environment rather than attacking the individual.
Exactly.
It carries the exact same emotional weight as saying, I notice it is raining outside. It removes the ego from the correction and gently invites the other person to observe their own behavior without feeling cornered.
It creates a shared reality.
Yeah.
But as comprehensive as these tools are, we have to acknowledge the messy reality of human dynamics.
We're sure.
Sometimes, despite your absolute best efforts to set a clear frame, despite using impeccably confident vocabulary, and despite deploying empathetic, I notice statements, the person sitting across from you simply refuses to cooperate. They might escalate into verbal abuse or deliberately engage in bad faith manipulation.
And this is precisely where boundaries cease to be a buzzword and become an operational necessity. The materials lay out a highly specific two-part formula for establishing an actual boundary. It is vastly different from just telling someone to stop doing something.
It is.
A functional boundary must contain two distinct elements, the condition and the action.
Correct. This is a vital distinction. If you declare a boundary but you do not attach a consequence, you haven't set a boundary. You have merely articulated a preference or lodged a complaint. The structural formula is, if you continue to do X, I will do Y.
Okay, break that down.
The condition is the specific, observable behavior you will no longer tolerate. The action is the specific, unilateral step you will take to protect your own environment.
So if the colleague starts raising their voice and using demeaning language, Alex would clearly state, if you continue to speak to me with that tone, I will end this conversation and leave the office.
Yes. And the absolute non-negotiable crux of setting a boundary is that you must be entirely prepared, emotionally and physically, to execute the action immediately.
You can't bluff.
You cannot bluff. If the colleague rolls their eyes and continues the tone, Alex cannot argue. They must stand up, walk out of the room, and close the door behind them. If you articulate a boundary and then fail to enforce the consequence, you've fundamentally compromised yourself.
You just showed them your words don't mean anything.
You have just instructed the other person that your words carry no weight, your lines are drawn in sand, and they are free to treat you however they desire.
This raises a very poignant observation about the reality of these interactions. We use the word connection a lot, and it conjures up very warm, harmonious, conflict-free imagery. But the psychological analysis notes that true, authentic connection is frequently deeply uncomfortable.
It is not always warm. Sometimes the most authentic, grounded way to interact with another human being is to enforce a rigid, unyielding boundary.
Yeah.
If you are forced to navigate a relationship with a truly difficult personality, perhaps someone exhibiting highly narcissistic traits who is completely impervious to self-reflection or empathy, you cannot rely on vulnerability. You must utilize what the clinical text referred to as psychological detachment.
What does psychological detachment look like in a real-world dialogue?
It means refusing to provide the emotional supply they are trying to extract from you. If a manipulative colleague is deliberately deploying bait-saying things specifically designed to trigger your ignition phase so you look unhinged and they look reasonable, you do not defend your character.
You don't take the bait.
You detach your ego, become the observer, and turn the mirror directly back onto them with a sterile, neutral observation. You say something like, "I wonder how the rest of the team would perceive this behavior."
Oh, wow. That is a brilliant tactical pivot. It shifts the entire spotlight.
It shifts the anxiety and the pressure completely off of your internal state and places it squarely onto their public image, which is generally the only metric a narcissistic personality actually cares about.
It is a highly effective method of protecting your internal ecosystem without escalating the combat. You remain the calm, untouchable observer. I really love how the materials draw a sharp contrast between surface-level talk and these types of difficult conversations. We expend massive amounts of energy avoiding difficult conversations because we harbor this intense fear that conflict will destroy the relationship.
Right.
But engaging in surface-level talk, just smiling, pretending everything is perfectly fine, making polite small talk about the weather while aggressively ignoring the massive elephant in the room, that behavior doesn't preserve a relationship. It just preserves a polite, hollow fiction.
Difficult conversations demand depth. They require immense vulnerability, emotional regulation, and courage. But if you can manage to approach them as a safe harbor for truth, rather than a battlefield for dominance, if you can ask open, curious questions like, "Can you help me understand how you are experiencing this?" rather than making it entirely about proving your own righteousness, they transform.
They become bridges.
They cease to be threats and actually become the load-bearing bridges to vastly deeper, more resilient, more authentic human relationships.
It completely reframes the entire paradigm of communication. Engaging with the world in this manner, taking the 5-second pause, utilizing affect labeling, setting clear frames, enforcing protective boundaries, it transcends mere corporate tactics or negotiation strategies. It becomes a profound reflection of your deepest personal values.
Yes.
It's about consciously deciding who you are going to be in the world, regardless of the behavior of others. It's about becoming a lighthouse.
The lighthouse is the perfect encapsulation of this entire philosophy.
Right, because a lighthouse does not frantically run up and down the coastline, jumping into the water to try and catch floundering ships and drag them to safety.
No, it doesn't.
And a lighthouse certainly doesn't try to argue with the hurricane to convince it to stop raining. A lighthouse stands utterly stable, deeply rooted in its own bedrock foundation. It regulates its own massive energy, and it simply projects a clear, undeniable, consistent light, regardless of how violently chaotic the storm around it becomes. It provides a reliable point of reference for everyone navigating the dark.
By taking manual control of your own biology, by rigorously maintaining the architecture of your own focus, and by communicating with grounded, unwavering boundaries, you become that singular point of reference. You create a localized environment where chaos simply cannot survive.
So let's bring all of these threads together and re-examine Alex's day through this new, empowered lens. In the original scenario, Alex started the day as a helpless victim of their own biology, dragging the heavy parachute, drowning in a sympathetic nervous system stuck on overdrive.
It was a mess.
They were a victim of a fractured, distracted working environment, bleeding cognitive energy through the massive penalty of constant multitasking. And they were a victim of their own reactive limbic instincts, reflexively picking up the rope and feeding the colleagues' aggression. It was a disastrous, exhausting day.
But imagine the alternative trajectory when these biological and psychological levers are pulled. Alex wakes up and immediately secures 15 minutes of natural sunlight to anchor the circadian clock and clear the melatonin.
Okay, good start.
When that ambiguous, stressful email hits the inbox at 6:45 a.m., the amygdala fires. But Alex intercepts it. They execute the 4-step quick scan. They engage conversational breathing to stimulate the vagus nerve, close their eyes to reclaim bandwidth, release physical tension, and say, I notice I am feeling a surge of anxiety.
The prefrontal cortex stays online.
The parachute is cut. They arrive at work, clear the visual clutter, and execute 3 rigorous 50-10 focus sprints. They make immense, deep work progress on the report while genuinely resting the default mode network during the 10-minute intervals.
And when the ultimate test arrives, when the colleague makes the snide comment in the hallway,
Alex deploys the 5-7 second pause. They let the harsh comment hang in the silence. They observe the rope on the floor, and they consciously choose not to pick it up. Later that afternoon, they initiate a conversation. They set a clear frame. They ask the colleague open questions, recognizing that the aggression is just the tip of a much larger submerged iceberg of stress. And when necessary, they establish a firm, compassionate boundary. By applying these specific mechanisms, Alex transforms what was a disastrous, chaotic day into an absolute masterclass of emotional regulation and personal growth.
it is a complete paradigm shift from victimhood to mastery. And this journey leads us to a broader, incredibly profound reflection on human potential that the source materials bring up in their conclusion. They discuss the mathematics of the 1% success engine.
This concept is crucial for anyone who's listening to this massive analysis of neurobiology and psychology and feeling overwhelmed. True, enduring mastery of your nervous system, your cognitive focus, and your interpersonal communication is never about massive, sudden, overnight transformations. You don't just wake up on a Tuesday as a fully enlightened Zen master who never gets angry.
It's not a light switch you can just flip.
No, it is about the relentless compounding effect of microscopic daily choices. It is the mathematics of consistency. If you can improve your biological regulation, or optimize your focus architecture, or refine your conflict resolution vocabulary by just 1% every single day, just making one slightly better choice than you did yesterday, the compounding math is staggering. A 1% daily improvement means you will be 37 times better by the end of a single year.
37 times better. The exponential curve of small habits.
Yes, the ultimate realization of human potential isn't found in grand sweeping gestures or massive life overhauls. It is realized in the quiet, invisible micro moments. The battle is won or lost in the agonizing 5-second pause before you snap at your partner.
Wow.
It's won in the choice to take a 10-minute walk outside without your phone to allow your acetylcholine pools to refill instead of doom scrolling. It's won in the conscious, difficult decision to say, I noticed we were getting off track, instead of screaming, you always do this to me. Those tiny 1% mechanical choices stack up day after day to engineer an entirely different, vastly more peaceful life.
It's all about learning how to navigate the muddy waters of our own existence, isn't it? We started this entire exploration looking for a clean, binary, engineering-style explanation for why our days fall apart. But what the science reveals is that we are infinitely complex, messy, biological, and emotional ecosystems. We aren't broken machines that need to be tossed out. We are highly responsive instruments that require manual tuning.
We simply have to learn where the internal levers are located, and we have to practice pulling them, even when the alarm bells are ringing.
So as we wrap up this discussion, I want to leave you with a final, specific thought to mull over as you step back into the reality of your day. I want you to mentally picture the single most difficult person in your life right now. You know exactly who I mean. The person who triggers your ignition phase the instant you see their name pop up on your phone, or the moment you hear their footsteps walking down the hall.
The one who is always waiting to throw that heavy, abrasive rope at your chest.
Exactly them. What if you completely changed your paradigm regarding that person? What if that incredibly difficult individual isn't just an obstacle to your peace? What if they aren't your enemy at all? What if they are, in fact, the exact high-resistance training ground you require to master the manual levers of your own internal environment? The next time you face them, the next time they throw the rope, do not look at them as a battle that you need to win. Remember the mechanics we've mapped out today. The furious, difficult person standing in front of you is just the visible tip of a massive submerged iceberg of pain and fear. And your only job is to remain the lighthouse and navigate the water.